Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mark Moss Show. As we're always talking about the decentralized revolution, we're talking about deglobalization. We're talking about the way the world is breaking apart. And of course, we look at it through the lens of politics, finance, and technology. And, I've been doing this show now for about 2 years, hitting these topics, talking about this deglobalization. And of course, I use history as our guide. I use cycles of history as our guide. And it's a lot of times I get people asking me like, Mark, you keep saying this is going to happen. When is it going to happen? And I say, well, it is happening. It's a process and we're going through it, but never have we seen it more pressing and more real than what we're seeing right now. And I say that with knowing that the last couple of years have been crazy. Really things really started taking off with, the pandemic, obviously. This authoritarian push caused this outlash. And that was just sort of this cause and effect. And we had this authoritarian push around the world to lock everything down and control everything, which then caused lots of things to happen. But I want to just pause for a second and let you know what we're going to talk about today. So we're talking about today how the world is continuing to break apart, specifically with the wars happening in the Middle East. And I want to break down, I've been sort of somewhat silent on this because, as I did talk about it in a YouTube video, but I've been somewhat silent about this because, it's so hard to know what is going on. You can easily counter either side. You can blame either side. You can counter the counter of either side. You can keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. And I didn't feel that, one, I knew where the truth was, and two, I didn't feel like I had anything very constructive to say. But now that it's been going on for a while, I've been digging into it way more than I maybe should or need to. And I have some more stuff today. And I want to talk about this new world war that's about to begin. And I'm going to use history as our guide. So we're going to talk about what's going on in the Middle East, but we're going to go through it from a historical perspective so we could try to understand where we're at today from let's say a neutral lens, and then think about how this fits into the greater global conflict that we're seeing, and again, back into this deglobalization or decentralization that we're talking about. All right, so that's what we're going to talk about. Now, like I said, things really seemed to take off during the pandemic, but really it actually started happening before that. So in December of 2019, there were 10 countries in the world with over 1 million people each in the streets protesting. Okay, so a lot of this pushback, this us against them, the people versus the government, seems to have started during this pandemic. Like I said, when this authoritarian regime really started to kind of put the pressure on governments around the world. But really, like I said, it actually in December 2019, 10 countries had 1 million people each protesting. So it's been going on for a while, and it's because of this pendulum that swings back and forth I've been talking about. Now, how does this fit into this greater context? Well, now we have this authoritarian push. And really it was sort of this last grasp of power that these states wanted to have. And per Klaus Schwab's own words, and not just his own words, his own book. Klaus Schwab is the head of the World Economic Forum. If you're listening to this show, I'm sure you know that by now. But he wrote a book called The Great Reset. That's what he called it. It's his book. Go read it. And he said that we should take advantage of this opportunity to reimagine, to reset the world, to build it new. And of course, they certainly tried to do that. And since then, we've just seen this continue to escalate. Things really started to escalate in Canada when the truckers started to protest against that. Things really started to escalate with the Russia-Ukraine situation. Of course, now we still have the China-Taiwan situation. We're going to talk about that later. And now in the Middle East, things are breaking apart. But like I said, I wanted to kind of go back through history so you can have a better understanding of what is going on there and where we're going. And again, I like to use history because it gives us better context of what's going on. And right now, what I would like to see personally is peace. I think most people would like to see peace. Now, there's certainly people on both sides that want to kill each other. There's certainly that. But I think the majority of people in the world just want peace. The question is, how do we get there? And so that's what we're going to take a look at. We first have to understand that in order to get peace, and this is just conflict resolution 101, in order to get peace, both sides have to be able to put themselves in other people's shoes. Both sides have to be willing to see both sides of the conflict. And unfortunately, that's something that mainstream media just doesn't seem to want to facilitate. Mainstream media doesn't want to facilitate it. I think there's members in both sides of the government or all the governments that don't want to facilitate this for any number of reasons that we can go into. But in order to get to peace, that has to happen. If I'm in a conflict with a relationship with my wife or with a friend, I have to be willing to stop and put myself into their shoes. I have to be willing to have empathy and think about where they're coming from. They have to be willing to do the same. We both have to be willing to make concessions, and we both have to be willing to sort of let go of the past, or we'll never be able to move forward. That's just how it works. This is not rocket science here. Like this is how it works. And so in order to have peace, that's what's going to have to happen. But for all of the armchair pundits that are getting triggered by what they're seeing at college campuses or whatever news channel you're watching, or people jumping to conclusions, and especially social media. Now, I'm certainly going to make a case. I was going to do another episode today. We'll come back with this probably next week on how a lot of this war is actually pushing forward this authoritarian agenda, which is censorship of speech. Okay, so we know that the end goal is total control over our money, over our energy, over our food, and that as we get further and further along, there's more pushback to that. And so as the powers that be continue to lose their narrative, because of the internet has given us this freedom of speech and social media and stuff, the only way they can continue to hold on to that power is through censoring our ability to, just censoring our ability to have free speech, and which is then censoring our ability to think, because now we don't have ideas, and also censoring our money. So I want to do a whole show on that. We'll come back to that next week. Let me know in the comments if you actually want me to do that, because it's a big, big, big lift, and I haven't fully committed yet if I want to do that. So let me know, hit me up on social media. Let me know if you want me to do how this war is really being used to push in more censorship, and not just in the Middle East. As a matter of fact, just today at the time of this recording, I saw a news article that came out that in Ukraine, they're moving to get rid of all the Orthodox Christian churches there, censoring people's religious freedom in Ukraine. So that's really what war is about. It's about censoring. It's happened in the United States as well. We've had laws against free speech in the United States as well. So that's certainly something that's happening. But what I did, I went down that rabbit hole. The reason why I went down that rabbit hole is because social media, as much as I do not want to censor it, I want to continue to have free speech. Because of the short nature of what we see on social media, we're able to quickly take things out of context. And we're able to quickly jump onto one side of a narrative or another. And without the context, we can't make good informed decisions. All right? And so, again, I'm not for censoring it, but mainstream media, the governments, the mainstream media, people on both sides, and just the use of social media, this short form content leads to this. And so I want to help stop that. And so let me bring context to what this is so you can understand. Now, if we look at the Russia-Ukraine situation for a while, I mean, there's two sides of that. They say there's three sides to every story, right? There's like their side, my side, and then there's something in the middle. And so, of course, Russia and Ukraine both have their own sides to that. And now we can see Israel and Palestine have their sides, right? And each side want to blame the other rather than viewing the events from the current historical lens that we're talking about. But I don't want you to fall into that same trap, so we're going to help you understand what this global historical lens is. Now, the one thing that we do know historically is that the best way to preserve yourself, to protect yourself, is to have money. The best way to preserve your money has been through gold. And right now, that's exactly why gold has been taking off. As a matter of fact, gold's up 16% since last October. Silver's up 30% since last October. It's been, like I said, historically for 5,000 years, the best way to preserve your wealth. And it still remains that way today. It's a way that I'm using to preserve my wealth as well. And I use a company called Universal Coin and Bullion. I like Universal Coin and Bullion because Dr. Mike Fulgens and his company are trusted and respected members in the community. As a matter of fact, he wrote the paper helping people avoid fraud in the gold industry. So not only are they trustworthy, they have amazing prices, and they have a very special offer for my listeners where you can get a silver 1 ounce coin, the American Silver Eagle coin, with no dealer markup at just $27 each with a limit of 3. And they'll even ship it to you for free and send you the award-winning gold investment guide as well if you just mention my name when you give them a call. So you want to give them a call. Call Universal Coin and Bullion to get this $27 Silver Eagle coin deal today, plus get great prices on any other gold that you may want. Give them a call, 1-800-UCB-GOLD. Again, that's 1-800-UCB-GOLD, or go online to universalcoin.com/Mark Moss. Now, like I said, there's multiple sides to each story. And so just like in Russia and Ukraine, each side seems to be fighting for their lives, maybe. In Israel, they're fighting this existential threat, but so are the Palestinians. But really, to understand this, we have to go back. We have to understand that there's a very long history of conflict in the region. And as a matter of fact, we can go back very far, and I'm going to do that. But I want to start with a little bit more recent times, because this is where most people pick up the story. And we can see that there's been this long-standing conflict between Israel and Palestine, which really began with the declaration of Israel as an independent nation state in 1948. So you're going to hear that Israel went and took the land from the Palestinians, which they kind of did, but that's not actually what happened. Now, what happened is thousands of Jews did immigrate to Palestine in the 1920s and the 1930s. When that happened, it did result in lots of violent clashes with the local Arab population that was there. Now, at the time, though, they weren't really taking it from the Palestinians because at the time, the British Empire had control. The British Empire was occupying it, and they were attempting to try to limit the amount of Jewish immigration that was coming. And so as they were trying to keep the Jews out, the British, who had control, it made the Jews mad, as you might understand. And at the same time, the British state was trying to support for a Jewish homeland, but that enraged the Arabs. So the British had control, and obviously, no matter which side they made concessions to, the other side was going to be angry about it. As this was happening, then World War II broke out. During World War II, an estimated about 6 million Jews were murdered in Nazi concentration camps. And so after the war, the Jews started flooding out of Europe and started flooding into Palestine. And then, they viewed this as their homeland, which it had been. We're going to go back through that history. And then by 1947, the British realized the situation had become unsustainable. All right, so this is sort of where we're at today. And so the Palestinians are like, hey, this is our land. How would you feel if they came and took your land? Of course, nobody would like that. Right? We could look at this objectively. Nobody would like that. But again, it was actually British land at the time. The British had ruled it. But I want to go back further, and then we're going to pick up this story. So let's go back a little bit further, because as a matter of fact, this part of land right there is like the oldest land in the world that we know about. Obviously, all the land in the world is the same age, but this is the part of the world that we know about. It's very well documented. As a matter of fact, we know about 1600 before Christ, BC, so that's, 3,600 years ago or more, we have documentation of that land and what was going on there. So in 1600 BC, Abraham, the father of the Jewish people, went and settled in the land of Israel. All right, so he was a Jew, and he was in the land of Israel, and that was his land over 3,000 years ago. What happened is there was massive famine in the land, and the people, the Jews living in Israel, went to Egypt to get grain. And they ended up moving to Egypt. So there was massive famine. It went for 7 years. If you know your Bible stories, you know this, but it's documented throughout secular history as well. And so the Jews left Israel, and they went to Egypt to get the food, to get the grain. Then this goes into the second book of the Bible, Exodus, which is Bob Marley made a song about, Exodus, movement of the people. And in 1200 BC, the people, the Jews, left Egypt, and they went back to Israel. All right? And so now we see 1200, 1100 BC, the tribes of Israel go back. They settle in the land of Israel. So the Jews lived in Israel. They left. They went to Egypt. They came back to Israel. Then In 1000 BC, the kingdom of Israel is established. King Saul is the very first king that's there. 1000 BC, Jerusalem becomes the capital of the kingdom of Israel under now King David. 960 BC, the first temple is built in Jerusalem by King Solomon. 722 to 720 BC, the kingdom of Israel that's located in the northern land of Israel is conquered. So now the Jews that have been there for now, 1,000 years almost, 800 years, they're now conquered by Assyria. And so now the tribes of Israel go into exile. Now the Jews were there, they left, they came back, they got conquered, now they're there by Assyria. So all of history is a story of one tribe taking over another tribe. Since the very beginning of time, we've had tribes, and they battle over scarce resources, and they fight over land, and they fight over food, and one tribe takes over another, and one village takes over another, and one kingdom takes over another, and all of history is a story of this. So, here in the United States or in Canada, you hear about the indigenous people and their land was taken, but that is factually correct, but they took it from someone else before them, and they took it from someone else before them, and they took it from someone else before them. And so how far do you go back? So we can go back, certainly as this story started, to the 1940s when the Jews took it from the Palestinians, or I should say the British gave it to the Jews. However, that was just the last time. So we're going all the way back to the beginning of recorded history, 1600 BC, and the Jews were there. Okay, so now let's keep going. So they were exiled. The Assyrians now took it. So now the Jews don't have it anymore. Now Assyria has it. 586 BC, the kingdom of Judah, the Jews, is now conquered by Babylon. Jerusalem and the temple are completely demolished, laid to waste, and the Jews are exiled. So now they're taken out of their own land. They're now exiled to Babylon. Now, some of the Jews remained, but most of them were taken away. There's a story of the remnant, the few that were there. So the Jews never totally left the land. There was always some that remained, like I said, the remnant. So now 586, they are conquered, and they were exiled to Babylon. 538 to 515 BC, they return. The Jews return from Babylon, and they rebuild the temple. 332 BC, now the land of Israel is conquered by Alexander the Great. You've probably heard about him. So again, they left, they came back, they set up their kingdom again, and now they're taken over again, Alexander the Great. Now we go 160 BC, the Hasmon revolt against the Greek Empire in reaction to the constraints imposed on the Jewish religious practice. So now there's this revolt. Now the Greeks are fighting over the land. 129 to 63 BC, the Jews establish independence again. You see how this just is a cycle. It just repeats over and over. Now, 63 BC, King Herod from Rome now rules the land in Israel. Now the temple's expanded, becomes a beautiful temple. But in 66 BC, the Jews rebel against the Romans. Because now the Romans control Israel. So the Jews rebel against that. And then 70, now this is 80, so this is now 70 after Christ. The destruction of Jerusalem and the second temple is built. In 73, the Romans battle to conquer it, and the Romans take over. They change the name of Judea to Syria, Palestina, and the name of Jerusalem to Elia Capitolonia, and Jews are forbidden to settle in the land of Israel. So this is 136 AD now. So again, the Jews are forbidden from being in the land of Israel, which they've been in on and off since 1600 BC. Now we fast forward so the Romans have control. Now we fast forward to 600 AD, and the Persians invade. And the Persians take control, and the Arabs conquest in 638 AD. So now the Arabs have control of the land. 638, the liberation of Jerusalem from a combined force of Persians and Jews. So the Arabs now have control of that land. But then in 1099 to 1291, now the Crusaders come in, and now they take over the land. And then in 1517, the Ottoman Empire comes over and takes over the land, and they rule. Then in 1863, so 330 years later, the Jewish majority comes back into Jerusalem and renew the land. Are you starting to get the story here? 1901, the establishment of the Jewish National Fund, an organization for purchasing land for Jewish settlement of the land of Israel, comes into place. And then there's a lot of history that goes on through here. It starts happening pretty quickly here. In 1916, it's called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and it was between France and Britain. And they delineated the two powers for this Middle Eastern area of rule in the Ottoman Empire. And this was right around the time, right when the First World War had ended. So now we have France and Britain having control, taking over power that used to be under the Ottoman Empire. And then in 1917, a document signed by British Foreign Minister Lord Arthur James Balfour espoused a national home for the Jewish people in the land of Israel. As we keep going, 1920, the San Remo Agreement gave Britain rule over the land of Israel after the fall of the Ottoman Empire and ratified the creation of the national home for the Jewish people in the land of Israel under the aegis of the British power. So again, now the British have power, they have control over the land, and now they're giving it back to the Jewish people who have been in and out of there since 1600 BC. Of course, the Arabs don't like this. They've been all around this. And so there's riots start happening. All of this starts happening. And now we're sort of caught back up into modern time. All right. So this has been a hotly contested piece of land. It's the oldest piece of land in the world that we have documentation for. And the Jews settled in that land in 1600 BC and have been in and out of that land ever since, for over 3,000 years. And here we are back up to 1947 when, after World War II, the British, having control, gave it back to the Israelites, to the Jews, I guess. All right. Now, this was also created by the United Nations. And so what the United Nations decided to do, because this situation was unsustainable, even though the British had control, gave it back to the Jews, the Arabs that were there, the Palestinians still didn't like it, and so there was this ongoing war. And so the United Nations stepped in to devise a plan, and they said, let's just split the land. Here's what we'll do. Let's just split it. Remember, both sides have to have concessions. So they split the land into two sections, and the Jews celebrated and the Arabs rebelled. That was May 14th, 1948. And that was the day the British troops withdrew from Palestine and the state of Israel was declared. And of course, then violence broke out. So as soon as the British troops left, then violence happened. The Muslim countries of Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, and Egypt all attacked the newly formed state and secured Arab territory within it. And in the remaining Israeli territory, thousands of Palestinians were driven out by Israeli forces. So this is where they're driven out of their home, which of course they're not going to be happy about. No one's ever happy about this. This is not a good situation to be in. And I'm just going to say, since I didn't say it in the beginning, I don't advocate for any violence. I think I started out by saying I want peace. I think most people in the world want peace. Like, can't we all just get along? Was that Rodney King? Why, you hear about like these, Miss America contestants and like, if I could get anything, I just want world peace. Like, why can't we just get along? Unfortunately, we have human nature. And some people are just bad. And some people want more power control. There's lots of problems. There's ideological problems. This is mostly religious wars. So you have two very distinct ideologies, and there's obviously lots of sex within that. But at this point, now this land has been given back. And there's wars going out. Now, it starts to go tit for tat here, all right? So we basically see that all these territories now attack Israel, and Israel moves in, and they drive the Palestinians out, all right? And this is what forms the basis of the conflict that's brewing today. The Palestinians were forcibly removed from their homes. They were, and they've never forgot it. Now, the situation further escalated in 1967 when Israel seized additional territory from Jordan and Syria. So that happened. That was according to a documentary, that was a war in which the Arab nations clearly were about to attack Israel. Israel had, as it were, both a legal and moral right to strike first as they did strike first. Well, that's their story. You and I don't know the answer. We don't know the truth here. All right. As a result of Israel's preemptive strike, the Gaza Strip, initially part of Egypt, came under control of Israel now. 1973, 50 years ago to this attack that just happened, there was a surprise attack on Yom Kippur. And after years of ongoing struggle, Egypt and Israel finally met to negotiate peace in 1978. So again, peace was struck out. It was called the Camp David Accords of 1978, and it returned the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, while Israel kept East Jerusalem and the West Bank, the Golan Heights in Syria, and the Gaza Strip. Israel also acquired more than 1 million Palestinian Arabs who lived in Israeli-occupied territories. It's a mess over there. Then we have the rise of Hamas. The Accords did nothing to soothe old differences, however, and for decades afterwards, Israeli forces and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, carried on hostilities. Peace talks were renewed in the early 1990s in Oslo, Norway, resulting in a two-state solution. So now we start getting into Hamas. We start thinking about the Palestinians. They wanted to be guaranteed an independent state. And so then the Palestinians were able to elect their own government with the territories of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, Jerusalem was meant to be a free city there. But of course, surprise, surprise, things didn't work out as planned there either. In 2000, violent clashes between the two communities resumed. In 2006, Palestinians elected members of a hardline Islamist group called Hamas. The reigning party, Fatah, ended up with just 45 seats, and so Hamas got 74 seats and won. The problem that we're in now that we're caught up here, and hopefully you appreciate that this was a pretty neutral stance. This is just history. It's just fact. It is what it is. The problem is now, so Hamas got the majority of the seats. They have the power. They have the control. And in Hamas's founding charter, it included a commitment to the total destruction of the Israeli state, which is, of course, a direct violation of the Oslo Peace Accords. So that's sort of where we're at right now. Now, we can argue either side. Of course, they want to completely destroy them. They ran them out of their home. If you got ran out of your home, wouldn't you want to go destroy that person as well? But how far do we go back? That's the question. The question is, how far do we go back? And really, the question is, how do we move forward with peace from here? I think that's even the much bigger question. Because we can see that as of right now, if one side vows to kill the other, unless they get out of their land, the other side says, we're not going to get out of our land and we'll kill you. How do we have some resolution there? I don't have all the answers here. I certainly don't. The answers are that we need to put ourselves in each other's shoes. We have to be able to make concessions. We have to be able to forgive, and we have to be able to move forward. But how do we do that in the light of violence happening around us? That's the bigger question. And then on top of that, how do we do that at a time when the people running the world seem to be wanting the war to happen? Why would they want that to happen? Well, if you remember, the last president that was assassinated, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated after he made a speech talking about the intelligence community and the problems that they had caused and how he would splinter them into 1,000 pieces. That's what he said. And then he was killed for that. The president before him, Eisenhower, as he was leaving office, he made a speech. Typically, after you're done with office or you're on your deathbed, you start to get very honest. And he said that the greatest threat that this nation had was the military-industrial complex. And we don't have to just go back to Eisenhower. We can go all the way back to the founding of the United States when our founding fathers told us that the greatest risk our kids, that us as modern-day people and as Americans would face, would be a country that has standing armies. It's always been the military being the greatest threat. And the reason why the military-industrial complex is such a threat is because if you have a business, the goal of your business is to grow your business. It's to make more money. But when you're in the business of war, that means you need more war. Business isn't very good if there's no war. And so we always need this opponent. We always need this boogeyman out there in order for us to continue to invest into new weapons and new arms and things like that. We can see how, in the well, really since World War II, but really into the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, we had this Cold War between America and Russia. And this led the military-industrial complex to continue to spend lots and lots, billions of dollars on new technologies and continue to build up the military and things like that. But finally, in late 80s and early 90s, then the USSR finally collapsed. Communism took its toll. The USSR collapsed, and all of a sudden now, the U.S. didn't have this big boogeyman. They didn't have this big army or this country to fear. But what happens with the military-industrial complex when they don't have this big enemy out there anymore? Well, they need a new enemy. And so shortly thereafter, all of a sudden, the enemy became terrorism. We had the Twin Towers that went down, and all of a sudden, we had to go bomb the Middle East, and now we had to go after terrorists. Now, the beauty of fighting terrorism for the military-industrial complex is that now we don't just have a country that we know where they're at and we can defeat them. No. Now we have this nameless, faceless enemy who's everywhere and nowhere. And there's never a way to defeat them, ever. So we have endless wars that can go on forever, and it's an ever-growing threat that always has to be managed. And of course, we can always stoke up a few more along the way. And so now we have this world, in my opinion, that's really, and in my opinion, it's always been the same, which is what we really have in this world has always been corporatism. Corporatism being corporations and governments working together, and they used to call that fascism. Now Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum wants to call that public-private partnerships. In the U.S., sometimes we call it crony capitalism or cronyism. Whatever you want to call it, it's the same thing. It's businesses working in their own interest with the government to continue to build their businesses. That's what it's always been. And so this military-industrial complex wants to continue to stoke more wars, but then we also have other things, such as through the Middle East, we have massive amounts of energy. So we have oil pipelines, we have gas pipelines. And so there's lots of interest. As a matter of fact, if you look back through most of what happened through the Gulf Wars after 9/11, a lot of it seemed to be going over there to protect the interests of some of these rich people or multinational companies, if you want to call it that, securing rights to the energy, securing oil pipelines, and things like that. It's always been about the money. And so because of that, it makes it very difficult for us to understand what's going on. It's the fog of war is what we call it. And so while on one hand it seems so simple, the other hand it's like, how do we know this isn't some fake false flag? For example, in Israel, Netanyahu, the prime minister there, has been under attack. The people in Israel are not happy with the government. They became one of the most authoritarian nations in the world during the COVID pandemic. And there's been so much pushback, and the country is starting to reject the leadership or the political leadership that's there. So, well, let's see. If they start a proxy war, or I should say a false flag war, if they start a war with Palestine, does that create this sense of nationalism? Does that reignite the people to come together for the good of their Israel country, and then sort of get the blame off of Netanyahu? Well, I mean, I guess that's possible. That could be something. Or could it be something bigger? Could it be something about the energy? Could it be that we are trying to stoke a war in the Middle East so that we could limit the supply of energy in the Middle East so we could get them out of their position of power? We know that OPEC Plus is trying to kind of set the price of energy and oil. The U.S. doesn't like that. Could we try to limit the entire area so that the U.S. interest of oil and natural gas could prevail? There's certainly a call for that. We can look at what's happening in Ukraine as sort of the same way. And so it's very difficult to say. And so that's why, as I said sort of in the beginning when I first started out, I don't know. I've spent thousands of hours studying this and talking about this and having discussions about this and reading back through history and trying to understand this as best I can. But the fog of war is so thick that we won't ever know. Now, like I said, what I think should be the answer is peace, right? And I think that should be the number one goal on everybody's mind is how can we de-escalate this situation? How can we treat each other with respect? How can we try to understand both sides? How can we come to a place where we understand that both sides have been wronged here? This is not a good situation. There is no returning things back. Sometimes things are just bad. Sometimes we just have to deal with what we have, and we have to try to move forward, and that's exactly where we're at. And so that's my point. I wanted to make sure that I've put that out on public record. I stand for peace. I'm not for pro any of this. I'm for pro people. I'm for pro humanity. I'm for love. I'm for loving each other. I'm for treating each other with tolerance. And that's how I'd like to move forward. I am against the ever-growing state. I am against the warmongering, neocon state apparatus of the military-industrial complex. And I hope that more people could see that the real battle isn't between the people, but between the government. And while all of this is going on, we don't know what's going on, so we need to think about things that we can control. And we want to think about what's in our control, and some of that is our own wealth and our own prosperity, so we can have options for ourselves. And one of the guys I've been talking about for a long time is a friend of the program, Dutch Mendenhall. He's the co-founder and CEO of Rad Diversified. He's the president of the Alternative Investment Association, and he's having an investment wealth summit in Tampa, December 1st through the 3rd. Tucker Carlson's going to be in attendance, Buck Sexton, and many more. And if you want to learn how you can create financial freedom, you can create financial security for your own future, then you need to be at this Invest Wealth Summit. I'm going to be there. You can get your tickets at the investwealthsummit.com today. Again, if you want to protect yourself, you need to think what's in your control and control your financial future. So come check out what Dutch Mendenhall has put together. He's a visionary leader. He's the author of the best-selling book, Money Shackles. And I'm going to be there. Tucker Carlson's going to be there. Radio television host Buck Sexton, Lisa Booth, Amy Vaughn, they're going to be there. Tickets are going to sell out. And so come on down, come meet us, diversify your portfolio, strengthen your financial position, and get your tickets to the Invest Wealth Summit. Just go to investwealthsummit.com today to secure your financial freedom and your financial future. If you just tuned in, you're listening to The Mark Moss Show. We've been talking about the way the world is breaking apart from a very long historical lens of what's going on in the Middle East. Hopefully this brings some context to you. Let me know what you think. Hit me up in the comments. Hit me up on social media. And that's what I got. Thanks so much for listening.